Okay, let's get started. I think we're getting close to a quorum. All right, first thing, I'm going to call it to order, and I'll ask Ann to call the roll and make sure we've got a quorum. I don't know who all now we've got to have eyes in the back of our heads.
There you go. Okay, Reed.
Here.
Dr. Cantu. Here. John Agather. See him on there. Anakwa Garcia. She's here. I see her over there. Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Viagran. Let's see her on the
Here.
Oh, thank you. Peter. Here. Got it. Andy Castillo. Don't see him. Al Rodriguez. Don't see Al. Michael Kinnick is here. Anne Marie is here. Jack.
I'm here.
Got it. Thank you. Wayne is out of town. Mr. Edwards. Yep, I see him.
We got him twice.
There you go. Michael
Bill, you're on there
Sanchez.
Double.
Thank you. Dee Dee's here. Kurt is here. Chris Fullerton.
No.
Don't see him. Okay, Dana's here. Jim Berg or Anita Ledbetter.
I see Anita.
Okay.
Hi, y'all.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We're good.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Reyes, we'll have our invocation.
Please join me for our invocation. We thank you for the many blessings you have freely given to each of us, and we ask for your presence to guide this meeting of the Rate Advisory Committee. Provide them with the knowledge, compassion, and wise counsel needed as they discuss the business matters on the agenda today, and help us to remember that we are stewards acting on behalf of our customers, and provide us with the grace to serve all people well. And we ask this in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. All right. First of all, I want to thank everybody for, and I'm right, we still don't have any public comment? Okay. Just want to check. It can happen fast. So, a couple of things. I want to thank everybody for changing the date to the fourth Thursday. It helped myself for sure and some other folks. We're going to do it one more month in March, and then we'll go back to the third Thursday. Right now, let's see. I thought oh, there she is. Okay. She keeps moving around. All right, we're going to have Dr. Romero talk to us about some things that we're looking at proposing, or the board is looking at proposing on the RAC, on the bylaws.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Okay, here we are again. Part 3 for me, part 4 for all of you guys. Again, thank you all so much for all the work you have done on everything you've tackled so far. It's really amazing. And you're all back. And maybe you thought your term was coming to a quick end, but that's why I'm here, because it's not necessarily. Because we have this additional task to get to, and nobody wants to rush through it, and nobody wants to do half of it with one RAC and then another half with new people on the RAC, we have thought about amending the bylaws so that your terms would be extended from whenever they were supposed to end, which was probably May-ish, until probably the end of July, or when this task ends. I hope you'll agree that that will be the easiest way to get through this last piece that we have to do, and that you're all really happy that you will continue in service through a good part of the summer. So I hope you are all willing to do this. The board will be discussing it, I think, next week. We will be looking at that change to the bylaws so that you will be extended in your time. And if you have questions, please feel free. Yes, Dana?
Saying it's going to end in July?
The terms will end, yes. And at that point, I think the board will determine where we go from there, but that there would be no disruption to you with your current term. So I think if anybody really cannot extend their term until the end of this task, it would be good to let Reed or Adelita know, and we'll move from there. But I hope you can all stay with us. And thank you again for coming back.
Thank you, Dr. Romero. Well, sorry I'm turning my back to the screen here. But anyway, this is going to be kind of it could be a difficult process today because we're going to get into a lot of detail. And so there's plenty of coffee out there. And so please stay awake. But this is very important. This is the third step on rate making. You know, you develop the revenue requirement, you allocate it among the customer groups, classes, and then you decide how to bill. Now, having been through a few RAC activities, this is really a very important point for the public to weigh in, okay? This is where they're most impacted, and this is where they can make the most impact on what they're charged. This is where they have some control. So as Dr. Romero says, we don't want to rush through this. We want to give it every bit of attention it needs. And that if we do that and we understand this, what we're going to hear today, and I can tell you that Jan Ramirez and her team have done a lot of work on this. This is not easy to take something that's pages and pages along, not only the code itself, the legislation, but the case law, to get that over to folks. And while we've got a very bright group, it does take concentration. And we have to know what the rules are we're working under. We just cannot dream up something that would be great and then find out later that it's out of the bounds, okay? We do live in Texas, and there are laws, and there's case law. So that'll be the first thing we do. The next thing is we've heard a lot about what other utilities in Texas have done, okay? So we're going to talk about other utilities in Texas and what they have done and the success or failure they've had with these changes, okay? That having been done, if we can stay awake for that, then we go to the third step, which is where are we on a technology level to implement some of these opportunities. Now, we've all seen that there's other states that do other things that might affect and work in a different way. And you know, if we have those individuals, then on the side, bring them up, let me know about them. We will research them and make sure if they can or cannot be considered within the framework that we're dealing in. But we don't want to waste a lot of time talking about things until we understand where we are bounded and what other people's experiences have been and what we can actually do and when we can do it. Now, it doesn't mean we can't recommend that something be done, even though it can't be done immediately. It is a goal that can be worked towards so that people can understand it can come on when it can come on. So we don't want to limit our recommendation, and this is all we will be doing, and hopefully by the end of July. And the reason July was picked is because we're going to have maybe new council people. They're going to want their own people on here. We're almost through this last step, and we want some continuity. We've got a great group. Y'all have worked, as Dr. Romero says, phenomenally, and we need to push on, at least for our people. Yes, Dee Dee. Yeah, I can probably hear you.
Okay. So if our terms were to end in July, when?
In May, probably.
In May?
Yeah.
Okay. And a rate increase would happen when?
Well, again, I'm not sure we're even going to think about right now the rate increase. We're just talking about the rate design. But the rate increase, as I understand, is planned to come forward in the fall, and that would be either under a different group or under a different format. Well, no, I didn't say there wasn't going to be a rate advisory. I just said, well, I'm going to be gone. So, you know, I don't mean to be bailing on y'all, but you've had enough of me. And so, but the city council is going to have to advocate for their citizens. we were set up to evaluate rate changes, okay? And that was a long, hard process a year and a half ago, okay? But if you typically think the way that happens, in most cases, where you've got a public utility commission is you've got a staff like Ben Griselle and his people, they evaluate it, and then you have testimony from the public. So it should be similar to what we did with SAWS, where you do stand up a rate committee and they think about this third step, I would guess. I don't know. But as far as becoming involved with the revenue requirement or how it's allocated, that's fairly mechanical and should be managed by Ben and his people, really, and the staff here. Because if we're talking about particularly revenue requirement, well, that's financials, and that's what they think they need. It's like any other budget. If it's like allocation, well, they're doing a new allocation rate study, which is also called a rate study, all right? So they're doing one, and I believe that's under Bractal, and so that's getting confirmed by a third party. Okay.
I'm going to ask y'all to use your mics when you're talking. They're having a hard time online hearing us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I didn't mean to
They can
interfere with
hear
that.
you, just
Yeah.
everybody else.
Oh,
Thank
okay.
you.
Yeah, use your mics. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, are there any other questions about the timing or anything? Because I don't want to burn any daylight here. All right. Nothing online? All right. Yeah. This is Shanna Ramirez, and she's the general counsel, and I'm sure she's got a lot of other titles, but she's the head lawyer. That's all we need to know.
Hello, everyone. Okay, it looks like they're going to pull the presentation up, and I will immediately mess it up now that I have control of this remote, but I'll do my best not to get us in circles. I am actually going to... to recruit you there. Okay, I am here to thrill and excite you all with a discussion on the legal requirements for rates. But as we go through this, I really want you to understand that what I'm trying to do is lay out really the guardrails that you have to stay in between to stay safe. And I always say stay safe in this context. I mean, to avoid a legal challenge, to avoid some of the legal risks that you have if you get outside of those guardrails. I'm going to talk through what some of those risks are so that you know what they are and you can weigh them and decide how close to those guardrails that you want to get. But please understand, I am not advocating for any specific position or telling you what you can or can't do. I'm really trying to lay out sort of pros and cons of doing it different ways. As Reed talked about before, we're going to talk through some of the processes and principles that we have. Some of the statutory requirements, the copy of the PURA regulations were sent to you. It's a pretty thick tome, so I tried to select what parts I thought were the most relevant to this discussion, but there is a link in the material that we sent you, and I will put it on the RAC website as well so that you can link to the full legislation if you want. I do want to warn you as you go through it that some of the terms can be confusing, in my opinion. For instance, the term public utility does not mean something like CPS Energy. It means an investor-owned utility. We are referred to as a municipally-owned utility in the Act. So as you go through those, if you have questions when you read certain sections, you are always welcome to call me. I have a lot of folks on my staff that are much greater experts than I am in this rate structure thing, and so I can get you the answers to whatever you need. We're going to go through some of the statutes, some of the regulatory guidelines. I'm going to talk about what the rate appeals process looks like, and that is because I want you all to understand if we get it wrong and someone complains about our rates and challenges them, this is the process that we would be going through to address that. We're also going to talk about some of the legal rules for customer classes and walk through those. And again, Reed mentioned this, but we are going to talk about the rules that apply in Texas because Texas law is going to apply here. Now, if you were to ask me, hey, I heard of this structure that exists somewhere else, I could always take that and apply Texas law to it. But I just want to warn you that the fact that something is legal in, I'll pick on California. The fact that it's legal in California doesn't mean it would be legal here. So again, if it feels like well, that doesn't make sense because this court says it's legal. In another state, there's just simply different rules. If we go to the next slide. When we talk about setting up the processes and principles, we're going to talk about a little bit of what our governance design looks like. It's important because CPS Energy is really unique, not only unique in terms of municipally owned utilities, but it's different than SAWS. And I think that's probably the organization that most of us think of most often when you're comparing what we're allowed to do in the city of San Antonio. We have a different governance model than SAWS does. And I also want to make sure that you understand for this discussion, when I talk about the city of San Antonio, they play two distinct roles for CPS Energy. They're our owner, they're also our regulator. When I talk about them today, I'm going to be talking about their regulatory functions. So what they can do, what they can't do, what they're required to do because they're our regulator rather than being an owner. So again, just making that distinction. Now, when we talk about how does the rate structure get put in place, CPS Energy Board of Trustees will adopt a resolution that says, this is the rate structure that we would like, and we send it over to the city council. If the city council approves it, then they create an ordinance that enacts that rate structure. So setting that out as the process so you understand what happens. Also, again, this setting the rate is the regulatory function of the city. They don't do it because they're our owner, they do it because they're our regulator. For a lot of other folks, that is going to be the PUC that looks at the rate structure and decides if it's fair. For us, it's the city of San Antonio. Yes, sir.
When the board sends a proposed rate structure to city council, do they only have the options of approving it or disapproving it, or can they tinker with it and make amendments to it?
The short answer is they can tinker. I don't know if I would say amendments is the right, but they could say, if you ask for a rate increase of 10%, they could say, we're approving a rate increase of 7%. As far as I know, I don't know that they would ever look at it and say, we're going to change your structure.
Because I know we're looking at rate redesigns, so
Correct.
it's going to be more complex than just saying 2% rate increase or whatever it might be. It's going to be a whole new structure.
I do think if it's a whole new structure, we would envision a dialogue along the way to ensure that when we got to that point, we thought that there was a good chance that the city was comfortable in understanding the structure we were proposing and would be in a place to where any adjustments would be minor. All right, as we go through this, I am not going to read to you all the statutory provisions that I'm quoting, but I wanted to put them in there for a reason and not just because lawyers like citing everything. I want to put it in there so that you all know when I'm pulling from a statutory rule versus when I'm telling you what I think the interpretation of that statutory rule is. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands the difference there. I will try to be very clear here, and about halfway through, you'll be really frustrated because a lot of times I can absolutely tell you what the rule is and then tell you that the rule doesn't have an exact standard, and then I can tell you all the ways that the standard was interpreted. But I want to be clear when there's a difference. So when we talk about the city establishing our rates as a regulator, that is one of the terms for selling utility service, and that's why they do that. This is part of a home rule municipality rule that is set up in the Texas Constitution, okay? And so that is why we are allowed to have the city of San Antonio as our regulator as opposed to the PUC. When I talk about jurisdiction, and again, it'll become clearer later why it's important. I do want, again, to press the understanding that the city of San Antonio is our regulator, so they have original jurisdiction in setting our rates. For a lot of other folks, that is the PUC. However, if someone outside the city limits of San Antonio complains about our rates, the PUC has appellate authority to review that complaint. So they don't set the rate, but they have the authority to hear complaints about the rate. Again, that's people outside of the city of San Antonio, and really the basis of that distinction is for folks that are inside of the city of San Antonio, you can, if you don't like the way the city is acting as our regulator, you can vote city council out of office. For people outside of the city of San Antonio, those are not their elected officials, so there isn't that same recourse. Yes, sir.
Will the complaint come in the form of backed up by the rules of the state or something like that?
The complaint-
If there is one.
If there was a complaint, and I'm going to go through like what are the minimums you have to hit to file the complaint. It would be filed with the PUC as a complaint or as a challenge to the rates, and then go through the PUC process, which is very regulated. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry.
When you say somebody from outside the city of San Antonio, I guess challenging or complaining about the rate, is that necessarily a customer?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it can't be some random person that lives in Lubbock that says, yeah, I'm gonna challenge what they're doing in San Antonio. It has to
One of
be
our customers.
A customer,
Correct,
but that doesn't live in the city.
correct.
Great, thank you.
Yes. Okay. All right, when we talk about the statutory requirements, I'm going to shift now into the Texas Government Code because that's a different set of rules. I did not send you the Government Code. It's a multi-volume set that'll set you to snooze, and if you decide you want any of these provisions, I can send them to you, so just let me know. The basic rule you need to understand, and Chad has talked to you at length when he's talked about the revenue requirement. The basic rule is that we have to collect enough money from all of our customers to be at least sufficient to cover the cost of providing service to all of our customers and paying all of our debt obligations. So that's required. There isn't wiggle room there. Total collected has to cover those total costs. There's also a rule that says rates have to be equal and uniform. So when we talk about that, what does equal and uniform mean? You have to collect the same rate the same way within a specific class of customers. Okay, so if you have, let's pick on residential customers. If you have a class of customers that's residential customers, all of those customers pay the same rate. You collect it the same way from that set of customers. I'm going to pause there and see if there's questions. Okay.
Is that the way it's being done right now?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll get into, if you were thinking, well, how come some people can get discounts and some people can't? Some people can have programs and some people can't. I'll get into that in just a little bit.
So under that provision, how is it that some of the people under the storm payments are paying less than others?
Well, okay, I think, so I hope I'm going to answer this. I hope I'm answering what you're asking.
I'm not objecting to it. I just, what, under the rule, how does that work?
So all of the costs were still applied equally to everyone. Some customers may qualify for discounts that other customers do not, or some customers might be on a payment plan that others are not. I'm going to go through those exceptions, the exceptions that are allowed. So again, and this is wonderful guidance. It's also clear guidance that equal and uniform does not mean unequal treatment. Okay, thank you. But what is also is very clear to say is that if you're going to distinguish between the rates that different customers pay, you've got to have a reasonable basis for that distinction. And when I say a reasonable basis for distinctions, when I'm talking about the provision of power, it has to be a distinction based on providing power. So, for instance, it could be the cost of providing services to that particular set of customers, the amount of services that those customers are using. Those are all relevant in determining the cost that you need to collect to cover the cost of providing service. If I said, for instance, anyone with brown hair, that's where it starts to get different, because if I have brown hair or not doesn't make a difference in how much it costs CPS to provide you service or how much service you use. So as we talk through this, I think that there's a lot of different characteristics that if I said to you, what's a reasonable basis for a distinction, you might think are characteristics that do make it reasonable, but here we're talking about characteristics that are involved in providing utility service. There is a rule that specifically says you can't give away free service. The rule says it is an impermissible gift of public funds to give away a service without charging someone for that service. So that is why you can't simply create a class of customers and say this class of customers doesn't pay for service at all. Yes, sir.
we don't do it anymore, but San Antonio used to subsidize solar rooftops, for instance. Isn't that giving away service?
I would argue no.
Oh, okay. But somebody might argue yes.
Yes, and so I'm going to go through again subsidies, but the subsidies that were provided under a solar plan are actually provided due to participation in some sort of other plan. They're not built into a rate structure. And this is going to be an important distinction as we go through this, because some of the
Let me just try to do something here. There's a lot in this presentation that as she gets further into it, it'll probably answer some of the questions. So maybe what we do is just write your questions down and let her get through the whole thing, and then we can circle back. We'll have time for questions because we're ahead of time, okay? All right, let's go.
Okay.
Plus, I can't see people holding their hands up online, so I don't know
I
who.
think Ann is looking.
Okay, I got somebody backing me up, but it's better if we'll just wait. Thank you.
Okay, the government code does specifically call out two groups of customers that you can create payment assistance programs for, and those are low-income customers, and those are military veterans. It's a specific class of military veterans, but military veterans who cannot regulate their body temperature because of severe burns in combat. So those are set by statute, and please understand, anytime I say this discount is allowed, that the rule will always remain in place, that where you have a discount so you don't collect from those customers, you have to take that amount that you didn't collect and spread it over all of the remaining customers and collect in the end, okay? So that's good. That's going to matter later. And when we're talking about bill payment assistance programs, remember that's considered an operating expense, and that's why you have to collect it in that revenue collection and spread it out over everybody else. So if we go to the next slide. We're going to go to more regulatory guidelines. We're back into PURA again. And again, reminding you, COSA has original jurisdiction. PUC has that appellate jurisdiction. This sets out in Chapter 36 of PURA, which I believe you received, doesn't directly apply to us because we're a municipally owned utility, but those are the standards that would apply if the city-set rates were ever challenged at the PUC. In that case, when we go to look at it, in addition to all of the regulatory rules that govern how that complaint and appeal process goes through, there is a host of common law standards, which are, when I say common law standards, that means rules that come out of court decisions when judges hear specific cases and they make rulings. Those are the rules that come out of those. So next slide. Talking about appeals here very specifically. Again, we're talking about non-residents of the city of San Antonio that are still our customers. If there were to be a rate design, restructure, or rate amount that was passed, the city of San Antonio would issue a written reports on the effect of the change on each class of ratepayers that's filed no later than the 14th day after the city ordinance on the rates is adopted. To file an appeal, and this is where I'm going to tell you the minimum amount of people that have to do it. A petition would have to be signed with the lesser of 10,000 people or 5% of the ratepayers that are served by CPS Energy that reside outside of city limits. And they have 45 days from when the written report is issued to file that. For us, the lower number is going to be 10,000 folks, so easy rule for you all to remember. All it takes is a petition signed by 10,000 of our customers that live outside of the city limits of San Antonio. And these are ballpark numbers, but 25 to 30% of our customers live outside of the city of San Antonio. So there's about 225 to 270,000 people. You'd have to get 10,000 of those to sign the petition. Next slide. I'm going to now go through some of the regulatory guidelines from PURA. And again, we're going to talk about these as we go through. The rates have to be just and reasonable. Again, the factors that the PUC have said can be considered and the courts have affirmed are based on cost of service and amount of service used. So again, think of what factors are relevant in providing that service. Rates cannot be unreasonably preferential, prejudicial, or discriminatory. So when we talk about our non-discrimination obligations as a utility, this is the provision that we're talking about. And there's I want you to think about in two parts whenever you consider a specific structure that you're thinking of. I think this will be most relevant when we talk about ways to achieve affordability goals. So when you're thinking through those, a lot of times you're trying to identify a class of customers that would be entitled to a lower or discounted rate. Okay, so that's one reasonableness check that you have to have. There is good law that says you can do that based on federal poverty levels. Okay, so that's a good way to check on income levels. So income qualify, is that reasonable? Yes. You also have to consider then, and this is a specific analysis to the city of, to the city of San Antonio and to CPS Energy's customers. Because remember, you take the discount that those folks get, and you have to take that and then collect it from the remaining customers. So I'm just gonna use made-up numbers. But if you're in a community where 10% of the folks are entitled to that discount as you design it, you take that 10% and you collect it from the remaining 90%. It's gonna be a pretty small amount. I would argue that in this instance, the smaller amount, the more reasonable it is to assume that you could spread it out over everyone. If, though, you set up a design where 90% of the customers are entitled to a discount, and you want to take that 90% that's uncollected and ask the 10% of remaining customers to pay that, that's going to be a much heavier burden on that remaining group that you're asking to cover those costs. So those are the two ways you have to consider it. Even if you can define your class and it's just and reasonable and not discriminatory, you've got to make sure that then that collection from the remaining group doesn't become unjust or unreasonable or discriminatory. Some of the things that the PUC and courts have said you can't do, you can't grant an unreasonable preference or advantage to a person or a specific classification, and you can't subject a person in a classification to unreasonable prejudice or disadvantage. That's a lawyerly way of saying you can't ask people to pay an unreasonable amount because you gave a discount somewhere else. Again, when you look at it, you're always going to be looking at establishing or maintaining an unreasonable difference concerning the rates between the classes. So again, if you have a specific rate of customers that costs a certain amount to provide service to, a different class of customers that costs a different amount to provide services to, when you look at your rate structure, you've got to make sure, again, that whatever you set up is just and reasonable. I would suggest to you that if you take the class of customers that it costs the least amount to provide service to, and you ask them to pay the most, you're at a higher risk for someone finding that unreasonable. The last thing I do want to note is that that PURA does specifically say that it does not constitute an impermissible difference, preference, or advantage because you decide to collect from some class less than the approved rate. Again, a long way of saying you can give discounts so long as overall your program is just and reasonable. Next slide. Here's the beauty of the law and what keeps lawyers in business. No bright line rule for what's just and reasonable. There's no single methodology. What I can tell you is that the PUC and the courts will look at your overall rate structure. So they will take all of the circumstances into consideration to decide if in totality it's just and reasonable. Reasonable rates yield a fair return or a fair value on the services provided. So that standard continues to evolve as the cost of providing those services evolve. So again, as we look at other places, as we look at the way other folks do this, it's also going to be something that you need to think of. So when you look at a rate structure, you're also going to have to look at their cost structure. Again, the just and reasonable. Okay. Next slide. When we talk about regulatory guidelines, we're going to talk a little bit more about what prior setups, structures have been looked at and what has been found just and reasonable. So you can't discriminate in charges or services between similarly situated customers. So if you can't describe on a reasonable basis the distinction between customers that you're charging different rates or different structures, it's just not going to work. So classes of customers, they've got to be similarly situated. It may be cost of service to that set of customers or the amount of use. Those are very easy standard ones. And again, our rates have to be sufficient to cover the cost of all the services in our debt obligations. They have to be applied equal and uniform to the class of customers. And generally, rates must cover the cost of serving each customer class. There is a little wiggle room there, but you're generally going to want to design your rates so that the cost of service to a specific class, again, I'll pick on residential customers, the amounts collected from that class cover the cost of services to that class. Next slide. Different treatment within classes. Again, it is allowed if there's a reasonable basis for the distinction. I've given you guys a couple of statutorily provided basis for that distinction. Income based on the poverty tables, veteran status with certain injuries are certain distinctions. Some of the things that we will talk through in just a little bit, I've raised a couple of more, but again, think about tying the criteria to the relevant considerations for providing service. And when we talk about, discrimination, one of the things that gets discussed sometimes is, are you covering your current costs or are you covering your future costs? It's not discriminatory to set your rates for current customers to cover future costs. However, you cannot collect from current customers future costs if they are unknown. You can't estimate them at this time. They're not reasonably anticipated. So you have to be able to articulate what those costs are going to be. You can't, for instance, just say, I'll make the most extreme example. Here, we're going to cover these costs for our current customers, but we know our city is growing, so we're just going to add 10% to all the rates so we can build out fast enough to keep up with the growth. That would not be reasonable. Also, again, when we talk about the discount and reduction, just remember it's got to be collected from those other customers. Go to the next slide. Talk a little bit about some of the cases that are out there. Again, we're talking about how do you set what are the reasonable basis for setting customer classes grouped together based on shared characteristics. Some of the distinctions that you can make: cost of service, purpose for which the service or the product is received, quantity received, different character of the service furnished, time of use. And then here's the catch-all: any other matter that represents a substantial difference as a ground of distinction. Next slide. Talk a little bit more about customer classes and what some of the cases have shown us. In a case where you said, okay, we are going to charge non-residents a higher connection charge than residents, if there isn't actually a higher cost to non-residents than residents, is not going to be okay. All right, so the reason this particular one was stricken down is because there was no evidence of the difference of cost. To me, that opens the door for saying if there was, then it would have been a just and reasonable distinction. Because, again, in the next case, and it was the town of Terrell Hills, so pick one close to home, a 30% higher rate for water service for non-residents was allowed because there was an increased cost of getting water to those particular residents. So that was allowed. If we go to the next slide. Affordability discounts, a subject I know you all are going to have to work through, so I did want to bring up what is known about those. There's absolutely allowable distinctions that are rate-based differences based on certain things. Low-income ratepayers are based on federal poverty guidelines. There's a couple of other objective criteria that have been upheld. So in addition to poverty status, energy burden. So you can look at that. I know we've had some discussion within this group of that. You can look at age and income. So if someone is a certain age and meets the income requirement for low income, then that would be acceptable. So when you think about some of the things that I think they're wonderful ideas that are generally discussed is, Could you cap the rates for senior citizens? Could you cap the rates for veterans? Could you cap the rates for those with serious medical conditions? Probably not on those basis alone. But if you combine it with an income requirement, then you would get there. And I do want to note that for all of our, so as I note, if you have a program that is just income-based, you're going to pick up all of those groups anyway. And in terms of the risks you get for challenge, it's going to be much lower when you add that income criteria as well. Other things that I think are essential, so the more you can move to them, the lower your risk is of challenge. If the average cost that's shared among everyone else that you're collecting this from is small, it's a lower risk of challenge. Also, the courts have said that there is a consideration to be given in how difficult or easy the program is to administer by the utility. The idea being you're going to take up time, dollars, resources if the program is too difficult to administer and does not create a significant cost on top of the regular operating costs for the utility. I did note that the low-income discounts do create the public benefit. That's the critical reason that discounting for low-income customers is allowed, is because it does create a public benefit by discounting those services. You reduce the costs of service shutoffs, you're reducing the cost of collecting dollars in arrears, and you're spreading the insufficiency of revenue across all customers, which minimizes the burden on any single customer. So that's the basis for the allowance. Okay, one more slide. And again, a little bit more. This is the freezing rates, something that we've talked about. Freezing rates, when you don't have a justification to show what the public benefit would be, is not allowed, so it would be illegal. Freezing rates for customers just because of age doesn't have a public benefit like the one I just described for low income, okay? So, and that is because if you just take a class of people that are over 65, some are gonna be high income, some are gonna be middle income, some are gonna be low income. So you don't have those same benefits to the public by discounting those. Again, the Texas Constitution prohibits gifts or grants of public resources for private benefits. Again, that's the reason that you have to show that public benefit. And as we go through this, I want to note, we're going to have to talk about affordability programs and discount programs. Those are not part of a rate structure, but absolutely have to be considered in this discussion. So I didn't go through these in the legal requirements, but I do want you to understand that that absolutely will be looked at in terms of the overall program and determining just and reasonableness. So I'm gonna pause there and read.
Well, don't leave.
Okay.
I can't do that. Let's take names down in some order, and if you can put the people back on the screen here so that we can see them. They can hold their hand up if they want to speak. All right, we're getting them back. Okay, who has questions? All right, Dr. Cantu?
Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful in terms of really helping us digest. Question I have on energy burden. How is that determined? What are some examples of it's been determined in the past?
I will pull from those that have been determined to be allowable, the standard in that specific case. And I'm assuming you mean, what did that particular program say? What percentage was allowed, or what national standard did you pull it from?
So if that's part of the rate structure, how's that arrived at?
Ellie.
So I have a question specifically on cost of starting service for customers that may have a previous balance, combination of previous balance, bad credit, bad payment history, utility payment history. Or no credit. There is I believe, $400 upfront cost to start service, and then the rule is you have to pay on time every month on the date for an entire year in order to recover that deposit that is asked of. I didn't really understand where that regulation or rule sits in all of this, and mainly my question is, how is that practice not predatory or discriminatory for low-income people?
Well, I would say what that standard's designed to address is is ensuring that folks pay their bills. So I would say just no dependency on income, but if you have a history of not paying your bills, which is reflected in your credit score, it is more likely that you won't pay your bill. So that rule is designed to ensure that we can collect for all the service we provide. Now, I don't want to get into a social policy debate, but I would tend to agree with you that folks that do have to pay that are likely lower income rather than higher income. So the effect may impact certain classes more than others, but the design, purpose, and application of the rule is uniform and just across all of our customers.
Pay on the day. I mean, I'll give you an example. I fell under that class in 2021 when I had to start my service. And I know that there are others that also have fallen under this and maybe pay it not on time, but have paid it every month for the year. They don't get their money back. And so in moving forward, just wondering if there's any flexibility that can be established, especially with the socioeconomic conditions that we're under right now. Perhaps that's something we can look into and maybe give folks their money back. If they do pay, maybe a few days late, a week late, as long as it's paid as opposed to on the date exactly, then they'll never get their money back.
So I think the good news is the short answer is yes. Amounts of set fees are things that you can look at as a part of rate structure. So amounts of set fees, that category of things as things to examine, you can look at those. Yes, yes, sir. Or, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Peter, go ahead.
Thank you, Shannon, for the presentation. Can you explain how the SAWS created a low-income class and how they found that to be just and reasonable? Is there more to it than just how it's going to be distributed? It's too close? Okay. How it's going to be distributed, is that the only reason that compared to CPS, because it's a different type of utility?
So, okay, so that part of the answer to the question is the rules that apply to the provision of water service are simply different than the rules that apply to electricity. But SAWS is one of the entities that we looked at when we compared how what we have compares to how they have. So that is in Chad's presentation. So I probably makes sense to wait until Chad goes and then have him walk through it. Now, it would be legal for CPS Energy to create a rate class that is, I'll use your example, low-income residential customers. So a class of customers that sets a certain criteria and you set that rate. Now, what the rate is subject to all the rules I just discussed. I would argue to you all that although that appears on the surface to create a huge benefit because you'd have a lower rate, what I would challenge you to do is look at our single class for residential customers combined with the discounts that are applied through affordability programs and see, does that get you to the same place?
Thank you. Appreciate that explanation.
Oh, sorry. You gotta raise it up there. Go, Dana.
So could you give us some examples maybe on how these rules that you have are being applied on customers that are not paying their bills? Or how are you going about this? Are you applying the rules that you have just stated across the board? What's happening here?
So everything that I just described is exactly how we do it at CPS Energy. So if I'll take the example of folks that aren't paying their bills. So if I have two residential customers, one of which is paying their bills and one of which is not. They were both in the residential customer class. They were both charged the same rate. They're both billed the same rate. Whether they pay for that or not is not a function of the rate design, structure, or amount. It's whether they pay their bill or not. Our collection rules for recovering unpaid bills are also the same for all of our class of customers. I think that the uniqueness of the pandemic and the fact that we stopped disconnection, which is the ultimate penalty for not paying your bill, was suspended for a great amount of time is the only unique situation. But that rule, again, was applied across all customers in the customer class evenly. So in that case, I would say the distinction of paying or not paying isn't a function of different set of rules or different application of the rules. This is just different conduct by the actors. We will collect the same way from anyone. The same set of collection rules apply, whether you are 2 days late with your bill or 20 months late with your bill. You're just escalated further up the collection cycle.
Is it reasonable to ask what the current status of those disconnections are, or at cutoff is the ultimate threat? What's the current status and policy?
I mean, the policy is we collect for all unpaid services through a set of terms and conditions that apply to all of our customers. I am happy to distribute to you the information that we have for that.
Good.
Okay?
Sure, thank you.
Absolutely. And we do tend to mirror the PUC allowable practices in our customer terms and conditions, which is where these rules are set out for all of our collection efforts.
I have a question and a comment. On energy burden, when we were studying it in this group, Brattle used ACEEE's data on energy burden. I think maybe that could be, we could defer to them as the standard, which is, the standard really within the industry. My question is, in part of the presentation, there was a bullet point about the large commercial rate is comprised of a customer charge, demand charge, and a declining tiered per kilowatt hour charge. And I think that when community members talk about CPS rates and fairness and equity, and I realize that residential customers do not pay that demand charge. Couldn't that be seen as not fair between a resident? And I know, when you talk about fairness, it's within the same rate class, but
it's also based on cost. So I would explain to you, and I know some people have told me to my face, I don't believe you, but I can only tell you what I know the facts to be. The cost of providing service to commercial customers is simply different.
Right.
And lower than the cost of providing service to residential customers.
Right.
And the costs that we are collecting from the commercial customers are only enough to cover the cost of providing service to the commercial customers.
Right. Okay.
And that if I wasn't able to give you an answer of why that was still fair and
Right.
only covered costs, that's when then that's when there would be an issue.
Right. Okay. More to come on that.
Okay.
Okay. Just one point of clarification. I had a question earlier for some folks. On page 5, you explained Chapter 36 doesn't apply. And then on page 7, you talk about Chapter 36 and applicable sections of that. So I assume to get into Chapter 36, you have to go through the petition process?
Correct.
That's only when 36 becomes, but
Correct.
once you do that, it becomes applicable.
Those would be the
And
standards that would be
I think people need to
applied.
understand that, because you're going to get this question from your constituents and other people, in that they're going, well, they say it doesn't apply, but then it does apply. But if you go through this, and let's be clear to what we think about it, these are customers that cannot vote in the city of San Antonio. There's a lot of them. I mean, CPS is a big provider in the county, small municipalities, stuff like that. So there's quite a few of them. I mean, if you just take the numbers, it's less than 4% on a petition. So just wanted to make sure everybody kind of got that. Also, there was a question that Dana had. We have to be careful, and we'll get help from CPS. When you start talking about, oh, they can't hear us. When you start, thank you. When they start talking about making these collections on bad debt, those those kind of move out of the rate making to some extent. Now, you've got connection rules and all that, but once you've bought something, you're back into a management of bad debt as opposed to setting a rate, okay? So let's be careful that we don't get the rate. Actually, and all we're doing is determining how we bill, okay? Now, one other thing that I want folks to think about is that, and it's right to Dee Dee's point, and that is when I was working on the rate, the rack for SAWS, the metrics, the marginal costing on water is different than power. As we have to reach out there for more and more water, it becomes more and more expensive. So it's a marginal increasing cost. As you supply someone that uses power 24/7 and more of it, it is a declining marginal cost. So a lot of times people say, well, that's a utility, but utilities have different economic models behind them as far as the cost structures. So when we're doing this, let's think about it. Dana.
Going back to what you just said, Reed, it seems to me like if the bad debts are not collected, it will eventually have to go into the rate structure one way or another.
It does, and that's where it circles back around. You're exactly right. It circles back into the rate because then you'll be writing that off as a bad debt, okay? And when you write something off, and we've got a whole raft of people from the financial area, but if you write off a bad debt, that is cash you didn't collect.
Then it becomes a cost of service which you're allowed to collect, and it has to go into the rate.
So
it is a topic of conversation, is what I'm saying.
And that's why it comes up that they're saying you can give this advantage because your risk of having bad debt goes down, okay? Other people.
Well, how does it go down?
Because you're not charging them as much, is what they're saying. That if you go to what she said, and this is an important distinction. It was on page. Where was that page? Okay, so on page 13, right at the bottom, this is how low-income discounts are justified. All right, and one of those is reducing the cost of collection in arrears. Not unlike health care, if a person doesn't have health insurance, they go to the public health provider, we wind up paying for that in our taxes, right? So it's a similar kind of concept. And these are the reasons that you can justify these discounts. Now,
I'm not objecting to that.
No, I'm just telling you that's what it was. I mean, you asked.
But it's going to be, somebody's got to pay it in the end,
that's right.
whether you write it off and you have to float a bond issue, or you make the other people that are paying pay it. It's got to be in the discussion, at least, on the rates.
I didn't say it wasn't.
Okay.
I'm just saying you have to be careful when you discuss it, in that you're recognizing that you've got a debt collection policy that could be established separate from establishing a rate.
Okay, I agree with that.
It affects it, but if we're going to set a rate design in there, do we include something like what Alita's talking about, that you don't cause these problems to certain people in the class? And there's also been several people asked, Dana, can we set up a separate residential class for low income? So you got low income residential, then you got low income residential low income. I don't know, but they might.
Well, it doesn't matter what you set up. You just have to, understand where you are and what you have to pay for. That's all I'm saying.
Anybody's arguing about that. But I don't know if you can set up a separate class, or you just treat individuals in the same class differently. Which one is it?
The first, not the second.
You set up.
Well, you don't have to set up a second class, but you have to treat all of the folks in the same class the same. So right now, we don't have a separate class for low income because we say to all of our residential customers, all of you that qualify for these affordability programs can participate in them. And those that qualify, you're all eligible to attempt to qualify. If you qualify, then you can participate in the affordability program. An alternative setup, rather than an affordability program, would be to have a separate class for low-income residential customers.
But in that case, and again, if that's the way it is, in that case, you're going to be allocating costs to that class because you don't know whether they're going to pay or not. You're going to allocate costs that, again, we're going to have to talk about the allocation between classes to make sure on that. I'm a little bit, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. Yes. Yeah.
So that just brings up a thought. When the rate design is decided here, and then it goes to the Board of Trustees, City Council, so that
Rate
delinquency.
design is decided at the board. We just make.
Okay, and at the board. So what's in delinquent accounts right now in that pot of money, Dana, your discussion made me think, is that considered in the rate design? Because we're designing a rate, knowing that's there, but it's not going to influence the recommendation for the rate design. That's going forward, not backwards.
I think that what you're stating is accurate.
Okay,
But if you take the amount, let's just say there's a bad debt amount.
Right.
Needs to be written off. Well, that comes back up into the revenue requirement. Because according to the thing, you haven't recovered all of your costs, and so that becomes a cost that needs to be, if you will, re-recovered. Correct me if I'm wrong. So you're re-recovering a cost that you didn't get the first time. It circles back to the top, it's the first step. Yeah. Yeah, it has to come from that class, or all of it. That's a question, if you've lost all of your money in the residential, if all of your bad debts is residential, I'm not sure whether it goes back up to the revenue and then gets allocated among the others, or whether it just goes straight to the residential, but Chad will have to tell us that. That's a nuance I haven't even thought about. Okay, let me just check the board. Nothing. Wonderful job. You're on break. Please.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
job.
y'all.
Yeah. Let's see what time it is. We're maybe running a little early, which is excellent. Let's try to get back here by, let's say 4:18? 10? No, let's 4:20. Does that give you plenty of time? 4:20? All right, we'll start up at 4:20. Boy, I sure want that. Okay, let's come back in. Get started. We let about 3 minutes slip here. Let's get started. Can we bring the people up on the screen? Yeah. Okay. We can't lose the quorum, because if we lose the quorum, we have to go home. Don't know if y'all know that or not, but it's true. I don't think so. I think I read the rules plenty of time. I better make careful. Okay, we're going to go into our second step, which is, what are other municipal utilities doing in Texas that are different, and as far as designing the rates part of the process. And Chad is going to go over this with us. And let's kind of hold our questions to the end, because there will be questions on this, and it's a little bit tedious to get through because there's a lot of different situations. I would reference you to this page that Ann blew up for us, which is a summary across where people have things and don't have things, and it's pretty good. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Reed. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see everybody. I know that it's been a few months since we've spoken, so I will introduce myself for anybody who happens to be new. My name's Chad Hubengarner. I lead our financial planning team. There's three pieces of that. It's a budgeting piece, it's a financial analysis piece, and then it's rates, the strategic pricing team. And so I'm going to talk through benchmarking information with you today. And I have one of my colleagues, Madison, who's going to come up and give you some details. She and her team are the ones that did the extensive research, and I had to anticipate needing to phone a friend because there's some detail in here that I didn't do the research. She knows it very well. So she's going to share in some of the duties for today. All right. So what we'll talk through today is benchmarking information. What I've tried to do is take all of the issues and objectives and themes and topics around rate design that I have heard this group talk about over the last 2 years and create sort of a framework to categorize the information, okay? So hopefully that will help us all kind of absorb and process what we will share. I'm going to start with some summary observations across all of the utilities that we looked at. And you can see the list on the page of the specific utilities here in the state that we focused on. I've got a single page on our rates using that same framework, so you can sort of tie back to, okay, what is it that CPS Energy does? Then I'll turn it over to Madison, and she's going to go through that 11 by 17 page that we printed for you. That's the meat of it. And then in the appendix, there's even more detail that was used to populate that big 11 by 17 page. And we have even more behind that that we're happy to share if you'd like it, okay? Okay, so this is the framework page I was referring to you, telling you about. There's kind of four categories of information associated with the rate design. The first is cost recovery. That is, funding rate increases. It's also segmentation or allocation of costs, recovery of costs for growth. It's also fixed versus variable cost recovery. We've talked about that a little bit in this group. That's all of the kind of cost recovery related topics. Affordability is my next category. That's energy burden, that's assistance programs or any other discounts. Conservation is, what I mean here is conservation specific to rate design. So to what extent do utilities in Texas use structural elements of a rate to incentivize behavior for conservation? In this category, we'll see things like volume-based pricing. The rates folks call that inclining block pricing, but that's volumetric pricing. You pay a different price for a kilowatt hour once you've already used some kilowatt hours. Maybe it's higher, maybe it's lower, just depends on the strategy. Time of use rates is another structural element that can be used for conservation, so that'll fall under this bucket. And then everything else, innovation, is kind of the catch-all. It's new types of rates, it's electric vehicles, it's renewables. Anything new and different that we saw, we put into that category, okay? Okay, so next page, I'm going to spend the next 2 pages summarizing the high-level takeaways for those 4 categories that I just walked through, okay? All right, cost recovery. What we've seen across the state is most of the public utilities have sought some type of rate increase in the last several years. It's a function of inflation, it's a function of growth, just general cost increases. What we did a year ago, or March of 2022, is not uncommon. And you'll see specifics on the dashboard page. We've noticed that it is becoming more common to see utilities addressing the imbalance between fixed costs and variable costs. We've looked at that extensively for our cost structure with a prior cost of service study. But we've talked about there's a disconnect where there is fixed cost recovery happening in the variable charges on the bill, and that creates uncertainty from a revenue and cost recovery point of view, and we've seen utilities addressing that by increasing their fixed costs. We've seen some utilities rebalancing between their customer segments. So what that means is they do a cost of service study and they say, well, this customer segment is responsible for these costs and this customer segment is responsible for these costs, but the rates aren't really aligned with that, so we're going to raise this one and lower this one, or lower this one and raise this one to kind of bring them back into balance. We've seen some of that rebalancing happening across the state. And the last comment in this category is around fuel adjustment or fuel costs. Our fuel costs have increased significantly in the past year and a half. They've started to come back down, but we adjust our fuel adjustment on a monthly basis. That has some advantages. Others adjust their fuel cost recovery on an annual basis. That has other advantages. But across the board, everybody has been raising their bills because of higher fuel costs. Okay, on the affordability side, so this is great. It sort of dovetails with Shanna's presentation and the questions that were asked. We are seeing utilities have some type of program. Most of them are keyed off of income relative to the federal poverty limits. We have not seen any affordability programs or income assistance programs based off of energy burden. We actually, Rick was telling me, with the launch of our second phase of STEP, our Casa Verde weatherization program, it actually does have that as a qualifier, so you can be eligible if you've got a certain level of energy burden. But from a bill discount point of view, we haven't seen that trigger a discount for any of the programs that we were able to do research on. They tend to be flat monthly discounts, so X dollars per month of a discount rather than X cents per kilowatt hour discount. So it's more flat instead of volumetric. And generally, those programs are funded through what we call base rates. That's spread to every other customer. There are a couple utilities that only do those programs if they are funded with donations. And so they have a process for providing an avenue for donations to be made, and then that funds the affordability programs. Okay, the next 2 categories, conservation. We do see utilities using programs like STEP. It seems to be less of a trend to move towards volumetric pricing. And Madison will share some details that we found, but we just don't see a lot of utilities adopting volume-based pricing. There's at least one in the state who has volume-based pricing, and they've sort of decreased the number of tiers that they had. So they're not necessarily moving away from it, but they're changing their structure. What we have seen is utilities seeking to use time-based rates as a conservation signal, to send price signals to customers. You'll see on the dashboard that Madison goes over, lots of the individual utilities are testing for residential, lots of evaluating of time of use rates. On the innovation front, quickly, we do see a lot of piloting of rates for electric vehicles. We see utilities continuing to expand their offering for renewable options. I will say, though, that focus on conservation and innovation in the last couple of years seems to have waned just a little bit. I think because of the pandemic, because of the winter storm, because of higher costs impacting the ability for customers to pay bills, it seems like we saw more activity in the first two categories, the cost recovery and affordability. It seems like most of the changes and activities that we saw by utilities they kind of fall under here. But still, work being done in these areas too. So let me level set quickly on what does CPS Energy do in these four categories before I turn it over to Madison and she'll walk through the detail on the dashboard. For cost recovery, so I think you're all aware, we did our rate increase on March 1st of last year. When we did that, we did not structurally change anything about our rates. Okay, we took all of the different elements of every rate and increased them by the same percentage. So for residential, for example, you have a fixed monthly charge and you have an energy charge, and we took both of those up the same percentage. So there was absolutely no structural changes in the rates. We still have, and because of that, we still have fixed costs being recovered through the variable charges. I think the last time I looked, our cost structure is roughly 50-50, 50% fixed cost, 50% variable cost. But our revenue, like 88% of our revenue comes from variable charges on the bill. So very disconnected there. We did, in part because of your request as a RAC, we used Brattle to refresh our cost of service study last year. They completed that in December/January. I think our electric was done in December and maybe the gas was finished in January. It showed the exact same thing as our last cost of service, very close to our last cost of service. And I have to get back to you on that, but it was in my opinion, it was money well spent. You take an outside party to come in and tell you that you're doing it the right way. You're double checking that all of the standards that you're applying are the same standards that every other utility in the country is applying. So it was a wise investment.
Well, you've got to do it. You have to have a
Yep.
current rate study.
Yeah.
Do a rate.
Yeah, and
That's a step before you get.
if we had not paid an outside vendor to do it, then our folks would have done it and we would have paid them to do it. So there's a cost either way. The main takeaway in my mind was it sort of confirmed that there is some subsidization between residential and commercial happening. Residential's revenue and their price points are a little bit lower than the cost of providing service to them, whereas commercial is making up that difference. And so their revenue and their bills are a little higher than the cost of providing service to them. Within about 5%. I think it's 5 or 6. It's around there. Okay, so that's cost recovery. From the affordability perspective, when we did our rate increase, we increased the funding for our affordability discount program. We went from annual funding around $8 million to annual funding of about $12 million. That provides about a $16 a month discount. That's almost $200 a year. That's roughly a 10% discount off the bill. We have about 65,000 electric customers participating in the program, and about half of that are also participating in the gas program. And that makes sense, given that about half our customers are combined electric and gas, and the other half are just electric. So that kind of proportion makes sense. We do have a lot of other programs. REAP is our other bigger one. And then we have several other smaller programs that we can share information with you about. But the biggest funding program is the affordability discount program. And that is keyed off of income relative to the federal poverty limit. From a conservation and innovation point of view, I won't spend too much time on that. We do prefer to use seasonality in our rate structures rather than the volumetric price signals that we see at least one other utility in the state. And so what that means is we actually have seasonal demand charges for our medium and larger commercial customers. So in the summer, your demand charge per kW is going to be higher than it is in the winter. And that's to reflect that we design our system for summer peak, and we invest and spend money on our system based on summer peak. And so that's a very specific price signal. For our residential and our small commercial customers, we have what we call the peak capacity charge. And that is in the summer months, and only in the summer months. It's a 2 cent per kilowatt hour adder for every kilowatt hour over 600 each month. So if I use 600 kilowatt hours, I pay 600 times 8 cents. And if I use 1,000 kilowatt hours, I pay 600 times 8 cents and 400 times 10 cents. Okay, and so it's truly a volumetric tier, but it only applies during the summer. And that's for both our residential customers and our smallest commercial customers. On the innovation side, we've done a lot of testing around electric vehicle rates. We recently launched a wheeling rate, which helps enable battery storage. And then resiliency was another win that we had recently, where we created a program to help defer the cost of on-site generation. And so customers can take advantage of that, and it still recovers the cost, but it's done so that the customer doesn't have to pay for it all up front. So a very innovative program on that one. Okay, I try to be quick about what we do, but the point of doing that was so that as you're looking at this big 11 by 17 page, you can dimensionalize what others are doing with the knowledge of what we're doing. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Madison. She is, yes, ma'am.
Maybe go back to Shanna. So when we talk about rate design, want to be sure the rate includes the two distinctions that we see on our customer bill. You know, the actual energy use and then the cost of it. So that and all of the regulations you told us were based on those two together as the one rate, and there was no taking them apart. No taking them apart.
Let's be careful on that one.
So I
Go
just
ahead.
want to be sure I understand when we're talking about rate design, that we're inclusive of everything, the bottom line of the customer bill.
No.
No?
I think bottom line of customer bill is not,
Sorry, Chad.
It's okay. That's okay. Don't apologize.
Chad, check my math here. I think bottom line of customer bill is probably not the right answer.
Okay.
I think we can tell you what is included and what is the right answer. From a just and reasonable evaluation, the courts or the PUC are going to look at all of those factors. So in that instance, I think the shortest answer is probably yes,
Okay.
but it may not be every single thing.
Got it.
Well, but when we're setting rates, now, Chad, you gotta, don't leave. Y'all are all the experts here. But when we're setting rates, we're setting the rate because that's the rate. The pass-through that's all the stuff that's in the fuel adjustment, which has now become a fuel charge, plus the contracts for renewables, plus the STEP program, plus the government is all flow-through, okay? And so that is flow-through. That does not go to approval with the council. They look at the charges, just like the PUC would, to make sure that they're proper charges, but that's not approved by the city council. So when you go and do a contract, correct me if I'm wrong here, you go do a contract for solar or wind, that does not go through the rate. That goes through the fuel adjustment. And you have to take the rate, what's charged under the rate, plus what's in the fuel adjustment to get to the bottom. If I'm wrong,
No, I think
Great.
what you're saying is this discussion today is limited to rate structure, but rates alone is not the total cost to the customer.
no, absolutely not. We're not saying that, but when we're designing or changing how something is billed, we can't change how the fuel that they buy is passed through to us, nor can the city council. It's untouchable. It's just, they do it.
So I have a question on that. Is there a variation in solar and wind charges? Why is it an adjustment? I thought it was a fixed contract.
Well, it is, but whatever the contract is, whatever it comes through in the fuel adjustment.
So my question is why?
Well, it was something I couldn't stop 15 years ago, Dana.
Okay, so the answer is, we have a diversified generation stack with different types of generation, and based on plant availability, based on demand in ERCOT, based on a lot of different factors, that mix of the generation units each and every month changes. So our rate structure, our tariffs, give us the ability, the legal ability, to modulate the fuel adjustment in very specific parameters. I mean, there's a formula, and we have to follow that formula. When the cost of natural gas goes up and down, or the cost of a coal contract goes up or down, or wind doesn't show up, or a plant goes down, whatever the case is, we look at the actual cost of the mix of generation for that month, and that gets passed through to customers. And every single month, the team meets, my team, Madison and Rick's team, we meet with the city staff, and we show them, here's the mix of generation, and here's what the costs are, and here's what the fuel adjustment is going to be. So there is, it gives us flexibility to adapt with changing costs. It's a cost tracker, but it's within very specific parameters with very specific oversight by our city partners.
That having been said, it is not approved by the city council. It's not part of the rate. It does have to follow a very specific structure as far as getting it approved by Ben and his folks. But they can go sign a contract for wind or solar, and it never goes to the city council. It just flows through in the fuel adjustment.
Well, with such a wonderful system, how can you ever get in trouble?
Well, I don't know, Dana. That's a whole different subject today. We're not getting into that. But we're answering Dr. Cantu's question. When we are doing a how you bill, okay, answer or question or discussion, those elements, those four, and I probably missed one, I don't know, but those four elements are not part of the discussion.
Are you going to tell us what is part of the discussion?
It's the rates, and I assume that they will. It's things like salaries and maintenance, and it's a lot of other things. There is theoretically, way back in '74 when they started this, there was a base amount of fuel that was in there, and you were just supposed to charge the adjustment up or down around that base amount. But that was so long ago, and it's so de minimis, it's in essence the whole fuel charge. Now, if you've been keeping up with power and energy and natural gas, at the rate it is now, it's down about as low as it's been in 5 years. So hopefully, that'll be an advantage for us, because when they pass through a lower cost, we should see it, and we should see it fairly quickly. But I don't know how they're buying their gas. So
well, you should drag your heels so you.
But it's like 2.15 an MMBTU right now. It's very, very, yeah,
So I think it is valuable to. So I'm a big structure guy. I mean, everything we do, I think about the structure of the conversation. So I think it's important for us to delineate categories of issues for this group to talk about. You guys could talk about whatever you want to talk about, and I think that's part of what you'll decide is what do y'all talk about next. In my mind, there's three categories of information around the rates. One is the revenue requirements. That's a rate case, okay? That's building a budget, that's creating how much funding I need to go and run the business, and then going and asking for a rate increase. That's revenue requirements. The second piece is what I would call allocation or segmentation. I've done a cost of service study. I have different customer classes. My classes of customers are comprised of homogeneous groups of customers that sort of use power the same way, and so I can allocate costs very similarly within those classes. But I make decisions about across the classes, how do I allocate those dollars? That's the second piece. And then the third is the design piece, okay? And so for design specifically, if I look at a residential tariff or a residential bill, there's the monthly charge and there's an energy charge. Then there's also the fuel adjustment. And our city council does approve the full tariff sheet that has the definition of how that fuel adjustment gets calculated. They don't approve it month in and month out. So to Reed's point.
They don't approve the contract that is the basis for that charge, okay? Now, if we went out and borrowed money and built our own solar, that would go through the city council because it requires debt, okay? But this does not go that way. And it's just the way they were able to do it. It's not been challenged. But that's another subject. Back to Dr. Cantu's point, we are talking about, there's 2 points, and that's a good point that Chad has made. There is a fixed charge, and that's on here. You can see what the fixed charge, and then there is this rate and it's relating to the amount of power that you use. You get so many cents per kilowatt or whatever you're using. I can't remember if it's either kilowatt or it's not megawatt for retail. It's probably kilowatt. And of course it gets that we are talking about. That's what we're getting ready to learn a whole lot more than I know about. Okay?
Good.
All right, let's go on.
Okay. Madison?
All right, we'll be covering this big dashboard. I know it's really small, but I'll just introduce myself early. Oh. I'm short. Okay. All right, will do. My name's Madison Bernal. I work with Chad Hoopengarner. I'm a senior manager in our strategic pricing department. My area really focuses on our innovative rate pilot offerings, as well as our market pricing and how we compare to pure utilities, which is why we're here. So we're going to be covering this big dashboard. You should have a bigger blown up size with you. And we'll be covering it, if you look at the top, there are the utilities listed across there, and then there are some rate topics across the left-hand side. I'm gonna cover each topic across the way so that we're not going utility by utility. So we'll start with effective price. That's sort of what Reed was getting to. Every customer is charged a customer charge, an energy charge, and in some cases with commercial, a demand charge. We calculated those bills and divided it by their kilowatt hours. And this price here in the top 2 rows will show you sort of average price per unit. And that's, in this case, kilowatt hours. So the top row you can see is residential. If you were to rank, if you were to rank these prices, we're about in the middle of the pack at 13.2 cents. Pedernales is the lowest at around 12.5 cents. And El Paso's the highest at 15.5 cents. On the commercial side, it's a little bit different. We rank a little higher. We're at 10.7 cents here. El Paso's still a little bit higher than us at 11.8 cents. And then lowest is, sorry, thank you. Sorry, I know I'm short and I'm trying to project. Just yell at me if, yeah, okay. Okay, and then the lowest price is Guadalupe Valley at around 6.4 to 9.4 cents. And this is just to give you an idea of how customers experience prices in the residential space as well as the commercial space. What's interesting about these prices is that you'll see in every case, the residential prices are higher than the commercial prices. And that's just because of the way that costs are spread over our units, right? Our commercial customers use a whole lot more power, so you've got your fixed costs spread over a lot more kilowatt hours. And so just the nature of economies of scale, that's how the prices come out. But they do, sorry, go ahead.
That's what I was going to ask. I mean, proportionately, does that come out? I mean, do you have evidence that there's a difference in the price structure, but that proportionally they are equal?
Yes. So we'll go through our cost of service study, I'm sure, in one of these sessions, and we'll really get into what is the cost to serve each rate group or rate class, as Shanna put it, and we'll talk about how that differs between residential and commercial.
Question.
Yes.
So you've bundled it all down for residential down to one simple rate, but it's not letting me know, do they all have a demand charge? Is it a fixed demand charge? Is it similar to ours? Is it more than ours? Is it zero? How do they split up their rate between the rate and the energy charge? We just see the total there.
So what we were trying to do is, it's always this balance of simplicity versus complexity. And we have all of that information, and we can send it right after this if we want. I mean, we've got,
Or we'll get it in future meetings when we talk
yeah,
about
I mean,
these.
we had 40 slides of additional stuff that we felt was just going to be overwhelming, but you'll be able to see, because you're right. I mean, this is boiling it all down to a single number. You'll be able to see the individual price points if you want.
Yeah, and let's remember, averages are dangerous, okay? So it's an indicator, but we're going to all have to get into more of the weeds. And again, for the folks that have joined us later, we spent quite a bit of time on this way back summer of, gosh, I don't know, 21, going through this. So those are still available if you want to go through those presentations too, or just.
Can I ask a quick question of Chad?
Let's see, sure.
I think that's Ann.
I can't tell who that is.
Anita, that sounded like Anita.
Anita, yes, please, go ahead.
Hey, everybody. Listen, I wanted to, I think, well, first, this chart is really, there's a lot of information here, and I understand nothing is perfect, but for me, was really great to see everything kind of against each other. And then my second quick question, this was just touched upon about, this point that as Reed brought this up, I think it was last summer or even the summer before, when we learned that in terms of the recovering the cost of service, that there was a really big difference between commercial, which, if I remember correctly, kind of the bottom line here was that commercial, because they use so much power and this, that, and the other, they more than pay their part of that. We recover the cost of service from them. I think they might even overpay, whereas residentially, the cost of service is never 100% met. And that's kind of that balance between the kind of the commercial and residential. Chad, can you speak to that? Is that generally, am I remembering correctly?
Yes, you are remembering that correctly. And the point I was making earlier was that our most recent cost of service study that we just completed confirmed that same outcome.
Again, anyone online, if you'll just go into the chat and let Ann know, she'll give me the sign and I'll recognize you, please.
All right, so great question about rate structure. We're actually jumping into that next. So every utility charges their customers pretty standard fees. There's a fixed customer charge, there's an energy charge, and for commercial customers, there's a demand charge. But the way they go about it is a little bit different. And we're going to jump into the variations here. We've also seen some structural changes, which Chad glossed over a little bit. And that is in our recent history row down here at the bottom. So I'll be covering both here in this next section. We'll start with our rates. So we recover the majority of our fixed costs through a variable charge when it comes to the residential rate. El Paso is very similar to us. We have about a $9 customer charge. It's a fixed monthly fee that our residential customers pay, and then they pay about 7 cents per kilowatt hour for the energy charge. What's interesting here is that Austin Energy actually was historically structured this way. In their latest rate case, though, they're moving toward a more cost of service based structure, which just means they're aligning their rates with their cost of service study. So they're raising their monthly fixed charge. They were at $10, they're headed to $15, and then they're reducing the number of volumetric tiered charges that they have. And they stated that's really due to the fact that a lot of people are moving to Austin, so they have a lot more fixed costs, right? You're putting out meters, you're putting out lines to serve these customers. Those costs are going up, but the average use per customer is coming down with more efficient homes, more efficient apartments, more solar. They're seeing the average use come down, so the customers hitting that top tier where they were recovering the fixed cost, that's not happening as frequently. The co-ops here that you see, Pedernales, Guadalupe Valley, Medina, they've already moved in this direction. So you see higher monthly fixed charges for these utilities and a lower energy charge for them when it comes to commercial. Residential. Medina Electric actually has a $29 fixed residential charge, which is pretty high as far as what we've seen, but not necessarily unaligned with a cost of service study. The other co-ops are very similar. They're around $20 to $25. So like I said, these co-ops have already moved in that direction. Austin Energy seems to be adopting that method as well. I will pause. Okay. So now we'll flip to the commercial space. We're still in the rate structure piece, but we're going to talk about commercial. Commercial rates typically have a monthly fixed charge, an energy charge, and then, like I said, a demand charge, with the exception of small commercial. Small commercial is treated similarly to residential, but they have higher price points. They get charged a fixed charge and an energy charge, but they're higher priced. Yep, go ahead.
What's a small commercial? What's the?
Good question. They're typically lower than 50 to 100 kW in demand. Yep. So, sorry, Chad.
You consider them, CPS considers them not by the number of employees, but the
Amount of use, yeah.
Their usage, yeah, that's right.
One thing that probably the definition you need to talk about is demand charge, because when we're focusing on residential, we don't have demand charges. You don't see that on your bill. But that's a very important thing that's on the commercial side.
Yep. Good point. So once we get to our medium to large industrial customers, across the board, all of these utilities will charge what's called a demand charge. And that's to recover cost of when a customer's putting their highest demands on a system. So for example, if you have a manufacturing facility, that's when their whole factory goes on, right? All the lights are on, the machines are working. We're looking at the highest demand in that month, and that's where that charge comes in.
You might talk a little bit about how you set that level for when the demand charge kicks in. This is important because it's a big distinction between retail and your large commercial.
Right. So small commercial typically doesn't have a demand charge. There are a couple of utilities, Medina and Guadalupe here, that charge even their small commercial customers a demand charge. But we don't have a demand charge kicked in until we get to more of the medium size to large and industrial customers. Does that answer your question, Reed?
Now, again, this is one thing we didn't touch on summer a year ago, is how the demand charge is set. Okay, while I know the emphasis here is on retail, we also need to keep thinking about commercial and industrial. So demand charges are set in a certain way by utility, and that is something that I don't think a lot of people understand maybe. And so if you could just elaborate a little more on how you set the demand charges for people.
Sure.
You want me to chime in?
Sure, go ahead.
That was a loaded question. So let me back up for a minute. There's three types of cost. There are what we call customer costs. That's like the cost of supporting you as a customer regardless of your usage. So getting a bill out the door to you, she may have high usage and I have low usage, but it costs the same amount to get a bill out the door to us. Those types of costs are what feed the monthly customer charge. Okay, then there are demand costs, and that's based on what the peak demands you put on the system are. Okay, and then there are variable costs, and that's costs per kilowatt hour of energy consumed, because it costs us a certain amount to generate variable cost to generate a kilowatt hour. The best corollary that I've seen across my career in utilities is if you imagine filling a swimming pool, and I've got a baby pool and she has an Olympic swimming pool, we could both use a garden hose to fill our pools and pay for that. And it would take hers a whole lot longer, but she's a commercial business. She wants her pool filled faster, so she pays for a big 6-inch pipe to go straight into her swimming pool so it can fill up a lot quicker than my baby pool, okay? Her pipe costs more, but she's gonna fill it with a lot more gallons, and so the cost of that pipe spread over all those gallons, it results in a much lower, unit price, and that's why you see the commercial prices end up lower. Does that help? Okay.
asking to make sure that people understand that when we're talking about rates with commercial industrial, you have to understand that it's not just this, get the bill out, plus whatever the rate is, plus whatever the fuel cost is. They've got this additional cost. And it is significant.
Yeah, the other element to the equation is what customers can understand in terms of their bill. And so larger customers tend to invest more in, understanding their bill, and so it's easier to put a demand charge on their bill because it's something that makes sense to them. Very few utilities actually have demand charges for residential customers because it's really complex. It's a hard thing to explain and wrap your head around. So that's why our residential rates don't have demand charges. That's why our small commercial rates don't have demand charges either.
Was that the reason, or was it really more that you couldn't measure the demand for residential before the smart meters? Even if you wanted to, you didn't have a way of doing that.
Well, we could sample it. So we've known what residential demands were. Now, could we meter it individually per customer? I can't speak to that. But that's at least one reason why the rate structures for residential tend to be simpler. It's hard to simply explain to a bunch of customers why there's this demand thing.
I still think it really comes down to you couldn't do it before. That may be true what you said, that it is hard to describe, but the real reason is you had no way of measuring it. It wasn't an option before.
Well, it's an option now, and we choose not to do it.
Thanks, Chad.
Excuse me.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I've got a question related to the fixed cost and the solar rates in Austin. It says they have solar rates for residential and commercial. And I know from our previous presentations, Chad, when we've talked about solar users or lower usage, and when we talk about the recovery cost within the residential group that has solar users, is that in place to address that discrepancy in the solar charge? And do you see that as a big impact on why we would have a greater cost of service in a residential or less?
I can take that. So the solar programs referenced here are similar to our net metering type structure. It's a program or an offering. It's not necessarily a separate.
Can you speak up? I can't quite hear you.
Sorry. The solar programs here are really like our net metering program. It's not necessarily a separate rate class. And that's how these other utilities have modeled their solar programs. When you're talking about cost of service, absolutely, that's something that we dig into whenever we look at, okay, as Shanna put it, is all the customers in a class costing us the same amount? If not, maybe we should look at, parsing out different groups. And so that's where we could look at something like a solar class. Does that make sense?
Is that an option that is being considered in the rate design?
Yes, that's something that we can discuss here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Y'all ask good questions.
Can we further refine that? There needs to be a profit on solar customers for sure. And, what I would like to see is that you do the math and everything else, and the rates are set like that so it's profitable when somebody puts a solar. I don't care if they pay for it themselves or it's subsidized. It's got to be profitable for CPS. And so far, I haven't seen any evidence that you're working on a system like that.
So we have to be careful about using the term profitable because we are a municipally owned utility.
Cost of service, then.
There you go. Yes.
So what I would tell you is, you guys can talk and decide what specific topics you want, to discuss in detail. And
I want to talk about this right now.
well,
Let's let her get finished with her
I
presentation.
think you need to explain net metering to them. There's difference between I think what they're thinking about solar and actually net metering. Maybe that would help clarify some of it.
Okay. Yeah, we do a net metering program. That just means that solar customers have rooftop solar, and let's say they use 1,000 kilowatt hours, their rooftop solar produces 500 kilowatt hours. We net their usage out, and so they're charged for the excess 500 or the remaining 500 kilowatt hours. That's how our net metering program works. There are several types of solar rates. Austin, for example, does a buy all, sell all model. So their customers pay for the full 1,000 kilowatt hours, but then they're paid back for the 500 kilowatt hours that their solar generated. So there are several types of pricing mechanisms we can look at, but happy to discuss further.
No, I understand net metering, and I have no objection to that. All I'm saying is that it costs so much to connect somebody, just like you were saying, the bigger pipe costs more money. But, whatever the volume is, this has to be a profitable hookup, or else somebody else is paying for it.
Yeah, that's a...
So let us get through the benchmarking information that compares what other utilities are doing. If you as a group decide you want to deep dive on a specific topic, let us come back for that topic. I mean, the solar conversation is a very complex conversation. We have slides for that, and we're happy to come back and talk about it if that's the direction you guys want to take it, but I don't have those with me in my back pocket for today.
Yes, let's go ahead. But Dana, as we discussed earlier, the problem that we're facing with solar is that a lot of the folks that have solar panels are not paying for a proper amount or full amount for the backup power that they have access to. That's what you're getting at. We can talk about that later. You're exactly right. Okay? Let's move on, please.
Yes. So part of the answer is the fixed versus variable cost recovery. That's why we're seeing a lot of utilities move toward the higher monthly fixed charges to account for things like that. On the commercial side, I did want to touch on, Dee Dee, you mentioned the declining block structure. It's different for commercial, so it's not necessarily that they pay a lower price the more that they use. What we're doing here with the commercial space is encouraging more efficient use of the system. And we measure that by load factor. That just tells us how well they're using the system that we've built up for them. And so that declining block charge only takes effect once they reach a certain load factor. All right, moving on to fuel adjustment. It's handled differently, utility to utility. We recover it on a monthly basis. Other utilities recover on a quarterly basis, even an annual basis. We like the monthly adjustment, but again, other utilities do it differently. Austin Energy, for example, does it annually. We all experienced higher natural gas costs last year, but due to the nature of their annual fee, they had to raise it actually about 50% in November, just to account for those higher natural gas costs. And that equated to about a $13 bill impact for the residential customers. So again, pros and cons to doing it differently, but these are some examples of how the other utilities recover it. Okay, we'll move into the affordability space. That's the next row down. Most utilities offer some type of affordability discount or assistance programs. The eligibility is typically federal poverty level. That's what we've seen. I know Chad mentioned we haven't seen anyone do energy burden. That doesn't mean that we can't. It's definitely something we can consider in this group. Similar to ourselves, Austin and El Paso have a monthly discount. It's like a rider or a tariff. And they offer a fixed discount where their customers are exempt from their customer charge. What's unique about Austin, though, is they also have a per kilowatt hour discount. They're the only utility we saw that actually does this. But it's interesting because it offers a 10% discount on their per kilowatt hour charges, and so it scales with the customer's usage. In addition to the affordability discount that we offer, which is about $12 a month, we also have the Residential Energy Assistance Partnership. This is a $400 assistance. It's capped at $400, but we give this assistance to our customers on an annual basis, and its eligibility requirements, again, are based on federal poverty level. And the amount of assistance is based on the level of need. The other utilities on this spreadsheet follow that sort of model. So customer will reach out, say they need help, and then the utility will give them assistance based on the level of need required. All of these utilities are funded either through base rates or through donations or both. There was a really interesting mechanism we found with Guadalupe Valley. They have a Power Up program, and what they do is they have their customers sign up to participate to help fund the program by having their bills rounded up to the nearest dollar, and that excess change is then directed to funding the program. So I thought that was a neat way, to fund an affordability program. Most utilities will offer either or, a rate discount or bill assistance. We found that ourselves and El Paso are the only utilities that offer both. Okay, I'll pause. Any other? Yep. Yep. So bill assistance is more like our REAP program. Yep. Any other questions? Okay. We'll move into conservation. All right, so to encourage conservation, utilities will utilize either price signals or a conservation program or both. We'll hit price signals first. Price signals include seasonal charges, tiered charges, or time of use type rates. We utilize seasonal prices and a tiered charge in the summer when demand is high. This is very similar to El Paso. We both have just a single tier in the summer for our residential customers. We've not seen any other utilities really do tiers at scale except for Austin. And we've already kind of talked about them, so I won't hit it much more, but they actually have 4 inclining blocks. They did have 5, they've gone down to 4. So they're the only utility we've really seen do this at scale. Let's see. The other price mechanism that's used for conservation is time of use. Across the board, we're seeing optional residential time of use rates. But interestingly enough, Pedernales and El Paso actually require their large commercial customers to be on a time of use rate. So we're seeing trends in that direction, and this is a strong indicator of that. Okay, we'll flip now to conservation programs. Conservation programs are like our STEP program. Many utilities have them. Ours is the largest. It's funded at about $70 million. Austin is at $19 million, and El Paso is at $5 million. And these are just conservation programs that offer behavioral demand response type incentives. So you encourage a customer to either shed or move their load whenever we have a peak event, and then they get some kind of incentive back, right? The smaller co-ops don't really have as many programs. They do offer, Medina and Guadalupe, for example, have rebates for their AC systems. But we don't see as large of a program as ourselves and El Paso and Austin. But in most cases, we see the pairing of these two mechanisms to enable conservation. Okay, any questions on conservation before we move to innovation? Okay. All right. So lastly, we'll hit innovation. Like Chad mentioned, we haven't seen a ton in this space with the pandemic, with inflation, high natural gas prices. Utilities really have been more focused on affordability and helping customers pay their bills. But there are still a few programs. So everyone has a solar program that we found. We're also seeing that Austin ourselves and El Paso offer EV type pilots. Another common theme is renewable rates like our green tariff or Wintricity. And then lastly, we offer, Chad touched on our wheeling service and our resiliency service. But again, the key focus here has really been on affordability and assisting customers. So not a whole lot in this space, but we're still seeing some, and that's not to say we won't see more in the coming years. So that's it for the dashboard. There is another slide. It is a cheat sheet, if you will, to help you look through this dashboard and kind of boil it up to the key points. Chad's actually going to come hit it at a high level, so I'll invite him to come back up.
Okay, so one last slide. Excuse me. We really wrestled with how much detail to provide because we didn't want to overwhelm, but we wanted it to be simple enough. This is sort of the cheat sheet view. We picked the utilities in the state that are what we felt like were reasonably similar to us to share the implications with. Most of them are munis and co-ops. El Paso is an IOU, but they're an all-in utility. So the other IOUs in the state, like Encore, CenterPoint, they are open to deregulation, and so you can't get a rate from that IOU that includes everything. So they're all similar utilities to us. The main things I want to point out is that everybody's got an affordability program, almost everybody. They do it slightly differently, but it's a very reasonable thing to have as a utility. Inclining block rates is something that we have heard a lot from the community as something that they wanted to pursue or be evaluated. And we don't see a lot of that in the state. Austin Energy is really the only one that has it as a base part of their rate. Instead, we're seeing a lot of testing into time of use rates. So that's certainly a direction that we can talk more about. But to me, those are the main implications of the benchmarking that we did. So at that point, that concludes my comments. Do you want to do questions? How do you want to do it next?
Well, let's got some time at the end. Let's try to get through this last step because we're right on time. Just a few minutes past, but I think I want everybody to hear. We've heard the rules. Great job. We've heard what others are doing. Now we need to hear what we can do if we want to do some of these.
Good afternoon. My name is Deanna Hardwick. I am the EVP for Customer Strategy. So most of the times you hear me talk about customer outreach and customer service, but part of my team also supports the meter to cash. And so we partner very closely with Evan and his team on the technology. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Kind of just want to preface this by saying our teams have been incredibly resilient and innovative by trying to figure out how we can enable things behind the scenes. So a lot of things that like Chad and Madison just talked about, for instance, the time of use rate, some of that's manual behind the scenes, but we're working at the same time on what we can do with technology so that we can do it on a broader scale for all of our customers. So first off, we'll talk a little bit about what's called meter to cash, and it's just from a customer perspective. The moment you start using your power, we get the meter information and then how it flows through our system. And we'll talk about the factors that we have that go into the rate design and the customer experience. And really, it's just the technology overview and some of the scenarios to tie in to some of the things that Chad and Madison were talking about in terms of what we can do from everything from the conservation aspect to affordability as well as innovation. So here we try to do a little bit of a graphics on the customer perspective and what's behind the scenes. So on the customer experience, right, most people, you flip on your light switch, you turn your air conditioner on, you don't think about all of the pieces that go behind it. And that's how it should be. I don't want people thinking about all of the pieces on the other side of the page here, but our teams work very hard to have this seamless experience go on behind the scenes. So from the moment a customer uses power and we install that meter, it starts reading information. Many of you know that we installed the smart meters out there. We're like 99.99999% installed. So what that means is we've got 1.3 million meters out there that are smart meters, and we have a little over 4,000 meters out there that we still manually read. But because of that technology, we are able to communicate more readily to get information. Customers are able to see their usage. We're able to pull it into our systems and then digest it so that we can generate a bill and also some recommendations on how a customer can save. So all of that process goes behind the scenes as customers go through and use their power. And so right now we have the ability to, you can go online, and from a residential perspective, you can go see your usage on a monthly basis, on a daily basis, and then also interval basis throughout the day. What we can do with that data is we can take one of those reads a day and use that for what we're going to bill off of. So we have some technology changes that we need to do in the background in order to enable things like the time of use rates or other experiences. But I'm going to hand it over to Evan. He's going to kind of break out what those components are and kind of what the time horizon looks like for those.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Evan O'Mahony. I'm responsible for our IT organization. That includes both the infrastructure side of our IT systems as well as the application and experience layers. So, Deanna talked a little bit about all of the different elements that make up what we refer to as meter to cash. I want to highlight a couple of factors here that I think are really important as we think about how we enable our rate structure. So we have a technology landscape that is fairly complex. I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail here in a minute. But a lot of the circles that you saw on the previous slide are individual systems where meter data is flowing before it actually gets to a customer bill. So when we think about implementing changes to our rate structure, we have to think about the cascading impact on all of our technology systems as we think about how to design and automate that process. As Deanna mentioned, we implemented our advanced or smart meters. That deployment actually started back in 2014. And as with most technologies, the meter themselves are evolving as technology trends are changing. So we, as many other utilities, are actively thinking about what's referred to as AMI 2.0 or the advanced meter infrastructure, really the next phase. And that's really all about enabling new types of behind-the-meter services. So that's something that we're thinking about. It's relevant for this group because when we think about some factors that contribute to rate relative to specific things that are happening in a customer's home, that may require this new type of advanced meter infrastructure that we're looking at in the horizon. Deanna, also, yes, sir. There are a lot of different options. Because we already are enabled with these smart meters, we do have the ability to make a change to the physical meters that are already deployed. And then we would likely couple that with a strategy for net new meter deployments. We would bring in the latest meter technology, so it would be a combination of both. Yeah, I think we can absolutely bring that back for another discussion. So Deanna talked a little bit about the customer visibility into their usage, which we often refer to as our customer data presentment. We are in the process of moving to a new system that will provide some additional capabilities to our customers. You actually can see a visual of what our customers can see when they log in to manage my account today. But as Deanna mentioned, that is reflective of a subset of the data that we are collecting on an ongoing basis. So we want to ensure, as we think about new types of rates that may have more variables like time of use, that we're giving our customers visibility more real time to what's happening in terms of usage. So we're actively evaluating that. And then, of course, the fourth element that we think about quite a bit is the actual bill itself, whether you're getting it in the mail or you're accessing it online. We do have some limitations to the actual design of our bill today, more specifically in terms of the number of characters that we can put on the front and back of the bill. We are nearing the ceiling there, or maximum capacity. So as we think about the ongoing evolution of our technology, we are looking at solutions that will enhance the experience from a bill design and layout perspective to make sure we're providing access to the information that our customers are looking for.
Sorry about that. Okay.
So I'll actually start to hit it here. So our technology landscape, a lot of the elements that I just spoke to are evolving today. So the visual that you see here on the left-hand side of the slide is a really simplified view that we like to use to orient people with our technology landscape. At the core of our technology ecosystem is our ERP, or Enterprise Resource Planning System. For us, that's a platform called SAP. A little bit of history, we actually selected the SAP platform back in 1998 and went live with our first phase in 2001. So that platform that we're using today for all of our customer billing is over 22 years old. And in fact, the current version that we have in place will be end of support from our vendor in 2027. So we are embarking on a large enterprise program to replace our core billing platform. Again, very relevant for this group because you'll hear in the next slide us talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we have today or where we may have a longer lead time to implement new things. That is very much aligned with our need to transition our core billing system. We did release an RFP for our new billing system at the beginning of this year. Our goal is to have that selection done by the end of this calendar year, and then we will be laying out a multi-year transition plan to move from our current state to our future state. In that middle ring where you see the term business systems, that's really representative of a lot of the other technologies that was in the visual that Deanna spoke to. The platforms that actually collect all of our meter data, how we analyze it before we actually send it to our billing system so we can actually create the bill. And then the outer ring is really representative of our operational system. So that's the actual, metering infrastructure, the networking components, as well as our other operational technologies. So the big takeaway here is we have over 400 different systems that are part of our technology landscape. And when we think about how to effectively make changes to our rate structure, there is a downstream impact that we have to consider in terms of all of these different systems and where we may have to touch them to get to a final end result from a customer perspective. When we think about our future state, the timing is aligned really well for the work that the RAC is undertaking right now, because as I mentioned, we are about to begin evaluating new technologies for the future, and we certainly have quite a bit of perspective around the types of capabilities that we want to see. Some of them are known challenges that we have today, and some of them are more of the forward-thinking trends that we're seeing in the utility industry. So we are very much incorporating those things into our approach. And you can see some of the desired outcomes that we've called out on the right-hand side of the slide. I won't read them all, but really to summarize, our goal with this technology modernization effort is to create better experiences for our customers. And we can do that through ensuring that we're providing them with real-time visibility into their usage and making it easy for them to access and consume that information. And at the same time, we are applying that same objective to our workforce as well. So those things are foundational as we think about this transition from a technology perspective. So what does this mean from an implementation perspective when we think about changes to our rate structure? You heard Chad and Madison talk about some key categories like cost recovery and affordability. Those two objective areas are very much aligned with the left-hand side of the slide. Those are things that we are doing today, and incremental changes to programs that exist we can do in a relatively short period of time. And again, these are very high-level estimates that we've laid out here, but we'll remain plugged in as you all continue these discussions so we can make sure that you have a perspective around what the technical requirement may be. So again, in the short term, things like increasing our rates, which we did, is fairly straightforward. Looking at our affordability discount programs and making changes to those, we can do that fairly easily, as well as making some minor edits to the actual bill itself to provide the right information to our customers. In this middle area, again, you can see some more forward-looking things that require a bit more technical work, like rolling out residential time of use billing. Today, we were doing that in a pilot form, but if we actually wanted to introduce all of the automation that is required, there's a lot of manual touches that are required in the back office that simply can't scale to support that. If we were to roll it out to all of our customers, that has a bit of a longer runway. Providing enhanced visibility to usage information, I mentioned we started that initiative and are actively working on that. When you look in this third box, you'll see I've labeled it as post-technology transformation because this is where we do have some more dependencies on the technology transition that I just spoke to. Saying that more directly, our current ERP system, our current billing system, cannot effectively support some of the things that you see here all the way in the right. So there would be some dependencies there. Those are things like implementing a tiered rate structure, which you heard Chad and Madison talk about. Detailed bill presentment, again, that requires us bringing more real-time usage data into our billing system. So we would need some changes there. And again, looking at time of use billing at scale, certainly on the commercial side, we would have some hard dependencies. So as you move from left to right, complexity and runway increases, but all of these things and a lot of the work that the RAC is doing will help to inform the requirements as we think about our future technologies. I'll pause, see if there are any questions I can answer.
Yeah, we'll take a lot of questions. Don't run off. Okay. All right, it's open. Questions? I got a list. Megan, put the people back on, please. Where are my people? Need them.
Right here.
No, I know. Y'all are here, but I need them too. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
What does the timeline look like for being able to have that detailed bill? How far out are we from that?
So it really depends on the scope of change that we want to implement. As I mentioned right now, we are limited in terms of the data we can put on the bill based on the data that we're capturing. Visibility into more real-time information, it will not happen in the short term. That's that 12 plus month runway. We are able to make some changes within the bill structure that we have today. As I mentioned, we're running to capacity challenges in terms of number of characters on the bill. So we may be able, hey, let's take some stuff off and put some new things on. In terms of a full redesign, that would run in parallel with our technology transformation. And so that we're looking at, probably 24 to 36 months out before we'd really be able to focus on that.
That's even with that fuel adjustment segment that we were talking about earlier, as far as how that's broken out?
So a lot of the things that are happening behind the bill, we can control those variables in terms of how we want to present it to the customer. Again, we would just need to understand those requirements and see how effectively we could do that at scale.
Okay.
Thank you.
What he's asking is, right now you see one fuel adjustment. You don't see what's the purchases, you don't see what's the fuel adjustments, you don't see the charges, you don't see the step program. What he's saying is, instead of having one line, we have 4 lines. Where is that? Box 1, box 2, box 3?
That would be box 3.
That's box 3. Okay, we're in box 3.
Over 12 months, but
Well, no, it's more than
24 to 36,
Let's
2 years.
let's make sure. He's saying it's post. It doesn't have a time on it. It's after your implementation of your new ERP system.
Correct.
And they just put the RFP out, so they don't even have a contractor working on it.
So projection, you don't have a projection?
So our goal, so let me provide a little bit more insight here. We just released the RFP, as was mentioned. We've got about 18 to 24 months before we have all of our vendors onboarded. Our anticipated transition to our future system following that is roughly 3+ years, 3 to 4 years. Now, what we don't know today is the approach we will take to implement and how quickly we'll be able to start turning on some new capabilities, because our goal is to do that in an iterative way so we can start delivering value to our customers and the organization as quickly in the process as possible. But it minimally is 36 months before systems would be able to start to be delivered, and that process would probably go out about 60+ months from where we are today.
3 to 5 years.
Thank you, Evan.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes. Right there.
So should we take this then to say that whatever in terms of design or rate design that we consider, given the information that we've had today and the information that we'll have in the coming months, we're still going to be limited by the infrastructure? So knowing that time frame, is it the best time to do this?
Let me take
Okay, yeah, I'm just thinking, are you telling us
That's
that?
not fair to him.
No,
He's done a great job. No, look,
Yeah.
I didn't say this well in the beginning. We want to make a recommendation, okay? Whether the recommendation can be immediately implemented or not is not the point. So we need to, we've got this group that spent all this time getting up to speed on this. We don't want to lose it. We want to say if there's something that we believe needs to be done, and then, you know, his group will take it into consideration, because as you build these things out, you might build something out earlier than later. And so it might be closer to the 3-year versus the 5-year. Did we have somebody on? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I mean, do not think that we are limited by just what the world can be done right now, or the CPS world can be done right now. Because again, you've got an old SAP system. I don't like SAP anyway, but you know, that's beside the point. We can talk about that later. But the point is that if you look at an old system like this, it does have its limits, and they've got to put a new system in. So don't just say, well, since we can't do it, we're not going to consider it. Yeah, Emery.
Okay, the new meters. I just want to make sure I understood what I heard. There's only 4,000 meters left in the entire city to upgrade?
We have 4,000 meters that are out there that are non-smart meters. Some of those will never be upgraded because some customers choose to opt out.
Got it.
But there is only 4,000, it's a little over 4,000 that are non-smart meters right now.
Okay, and are those residential and commercial, or just residential?
The majority are residential. There are some commercial out there.
Okay, so the smart meters, you still send people out to read meters?
We only read the ones that either, for some reason, we can't get the information from them, or that are the non-smart meters. So we're only reading about 4,000 meters a month.
What reason would you not be able to get the information from them if it's a smart meter?
We can get the information from them. It's what we can bill off of. It's creating the technology to build off of it. Because right now, we do everything from being able to know what your usage is by intervals. That's how you can go online right now. Actually, that picture up there was my usage from middle of January. And so you can see what your interval usage is to what we can bill off by day. And so we can bill by one read that we get per day. We just need to enhance the technology, and that's a partnership with the information we get from the meter, as well as the information that we can put through our system, and our system can calculate to bill for throughout the day for, say, a time of use or a prepaid.
Let's get it down real clear. If you want to do every 15 minutes, they can get every 15 minutes, but they can only get one 15-minute.
No. That's not
You only
where
bill
I'm
off of
going
one.
with this. I'm going to say to you that from what I see in conversations with my neighbors posted on Nextdoor, there's a whole heck of a lot of education that still needs to be done here. People don't even understand if they have a smart meter or not. When they see a meter guy out there on the street, it all goes south.
Well,
and that's another issue. That's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
I just want to get it clear in my head because I talk to my neighbors, and now I can say there's only 4,000 in the city, and maybe your neighbor didn't opt in, and that's why you're seeing a little guy come around.
And we do maintenance. So along those lines, there's a lot of work that we have to do to make sure that those meters are still spinning, right, and still able to communicate. We're also able to detect a lot more information. If for some reason we get an alert off your meter that says that there's a high temperature, it could indicate that there's a potential security or safety issue at your house. So we might send somebody out to say, is there something that we can do preemptively before some damage happens? So you will see meter people in the community, but they might be more maintenance and preemptive versus on the back end. But be happy to see what we can do in your community to create some more awareness, education, and participate on Nextdoor.
Yes, because really what happens is people will go to the guy and say, why are you here? And he says, well, I'm here reading the meter. And then it just all still cascades.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just along those lines, I think, Reed, to something that we were talking about before, as we go through and gather information and get feedback as to what the different structures you'd like to see, helps us create the requirements that we build. So as we go through the RFP or we're building up what our new system capabilities can be, Reed, to your point, we might not be able to turn that on tomorrow, but whenever we think about what we're doing a couple years from now, we have built in those requirements, and it helps shape our strategy of how we want to, what flexibility we want to build in for our billing capabilities.
Thank you.
Let's just, let's be clear on a couple of points that are very important here for us in our consideration. We have an advantage over someone like SAWS. They started a pilot program on smart meters several years ago and abandoned it on the water. So they're still going around and reading the meters. And of course, we all get neighbors that call us and go, well, they didn't read my meter and then I got this thing. We don't have that problem. What we have is we have an abundance of data coming in. We just can't use it once it gets here. So that's kind of a high-class problem, okay? If we had to go out and change all these meters, then that would be it. And then there's another confusing point we need to make sure that our folks understand, is that when they go down and they get $50, $79 and get a smart thermostat, that's a completely different thing from what we're talking about here. Okay?
That's
And
they are confused.
12 or 15 years ago, CPS started to make the changes to collect more data and decided that was not what they wanted to do right then, and that's when they started to go get your own thermostat deal. So if we're looking at things where, we'll talk about different options, but right now, we have a lot of capability on the ground, and when they get a new system, new ERP, they can use that data, and we need to understand what they can do in the future, not what we're limited to today.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? On the board. And that is? Christopher. I didn't know you were here, Christopher. Thank you for joining. Go ahead. Go ahead, Christopher. I don't know where he is. Go ahead, Christopher.
There we go. My microphone was a little slow. In addition to the ongoing RAC deliberations, what other opportunities are imagined going forward over the next several months for other avenues of public engagement on this?
Did you say public engagement?
That's right, yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Somebody want to talk? I don't know what y'all have planned.
Hi, everyone. Melissa Sorola, VP of Communications and Marketing in Anne-Marie. I want to talk to you later about your next door so we can get some information out there. But great question. We are just starting the planning process for that. I think the generation planning public engagement we did was a great baseline for us. So we know some capabilities. We know what we can do to improve. So you will see a robust engagement as well. And we'll get your feedback, too, before we launch that.
Okay. I'm looking at the board. I'm looking at Ann. I'm looking at y'all. I'm seeing some smiles, actually, so let's quit while we're ahead. We're adjourned. We'll see you the fourth Thursday of next month, okay?